I'm Margaret Wilson, 68, and I never thought my own son would betray me like this. The day I discovered David had been systematically draining my pension account, my entire world shattered. I stood frozen in the bank lobby, staring at my balance. $147.32, nearly $430,000 gone. When I confronted him, he actually laughed. "It's my inheritance anyway, Mom. I'm just taking it early." But what David didn't know was that the bank manager had pulled me aside with some paperwork. "Mrs. Wilson," she whispered, "we've been tracking this for months. If you're watching this and have ever trusted family with your finances, please stay with me. I'm about to share how my son's betrayal nearly destroyed me, and the unexpected way justice finally came. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments and hit subscribe to hear more stories of family betrayal and eventual justice. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. My story really begins 12 years ago when my husband Robert died suddenly of a heart attack at 59. We'd been married for 35 years, and I never imagined navigating my later years without him. Robert had always handled our finances, though I'd built a substantial pension through my 40-year career as a head nurse at Memorial Hospital. I prided myself on that career, working night shifts when the kids were young, eventually becoming nursing supervisor before my retirement at 65. We had 2 children, David, now 42, and Susan, 39. Susan had moved to Seattle for work right after college and built a life there with her husband Michael. They visited twice a year, but the distance made our relationship more distant than I would have liked. David, on the other hand, had always been local. And I admit I'd always had a soft spot for my son. David had never quite found his footing in life. He worked sporadically as a sales representative for various companies but never stayed anywhere long. His marriage to Stephanie had ended after just 3 years, and he'd struggled financially ever since. I worried about him constantly, the way mothers do, but I never saw what was coming. 3 years ago, David showed up at my door with 2 suitcases and a story about his apartment building being sold. He needed a place to stay just temporarily while he found a new place. Of course, I welcomed him. The house had felt too empty since Robert died, and I thought having David around would be good for both of us. At first, it was nice having company. David helped with household tasks I was finding increasingly difficult as my arthritis worsened. Then my eyesight started deteriorating, early cataracts, the doctor said, and David offered to help with my finances. "Mom, you shouldn't strain your eyes trying to read those tiny statements," he'd said. "Let me help you. Dad would have wanted me to take care of you." That mention of Robert always weakened my resolve. I hesitated at first, but David persisted. He set up online banking for me, saying it would be easier to manage everything. He started handling my bills, my pension deposits, and eventually, he convinced me to add him to my accounts in case of emergency. Looking back, I can see all the red flags I ignored. Bills I thought were paid resulting in collection notices that David explained away as mix-ups. Missing bank statements that were probably lost in the mail. New credit cards arriving that David said were replacements for your old ones. When I questioned anything, he would sigh dramatically and say, "Mom, you're getting confused again. Remember? We talked about this last week." I began doubting my own memory. Was I becoming forgetful? David frequently commented on how I'd misplaced things or forgotten conversations, always with a concerned look that made me feel like I was becoming a burden. Now I realize this was classic gaslighting, but at the time, I just felt increasingly dependent on him. My friends noticed changes. My weekly lunch with Eleanor next door dwindled to monthly, then rarely, as David always had excuses for why I couldn't go. "Mom's not feeling well today," he'd tell her when she came to the door, even when I felt fine. My church group called less frequently after David repeatedly told them I was resting when they called. I made excuses for all of it. David was protective because he cared. He was helping me because I needed it. He was living with me because we both benefited from the arrangement. Most importantly, he was family, and after losing Robert, preserving my remaining family felt crucial. I was raised to believe that family loyalty comes first, no matter what. That belief nearly cost me everything. The day everything changed started ordinary enough. I had a routine appointment with my ophthalmologist, Dr. Chen. David usually drove me to appointments, but he had some important business meeting that day, so I took a taxi. "Doctor," Chen confirmed what we'd discussed at my previous visit. I needed cataract surgery on both eyes. Your insurance should cover most of it, he said, handing me a brochure with cost estimates. That confused me. But my son told me my insurance wouldn't cover it. Dr. Chen frowned. Who told you that? Medicare, plus your supplemental policy, should cover nearly all of it. You have excellent coverage, Mrs. Wilson. A chill ran through me. Why would David lie about my insurance coverage? I thanked Dr. Chen and decided to visit my bank on the way home. It had been over a year since I'd been there in person, with David handling everything. The downtown branch of First National was busy that Tuesday morning. I waited in line, clutching my ID and account information. When my turn came, the young teller, her name tag said Alicia, greeted me warmly. How can I help you today, ma'am? I'd like to check my account balance and get statements for the past 6 months, please. I slid my ID across the counter. Alicia typed on her computer, then paused. She frowned slightly, typed something else, then looked up. One moment. Mrs. Wilson. Let me check something. She picked up a phone and spoke quietly, glancing at me occasionally. My heart began racing. Something was wrong. I could feel it. A few minutes later, a professional-looking woman in a navy suit approached. Mrs. Wilson? I'm Jessica Miller, the branch manager. Would you mind coming to my office? I think we need to discuss your accounts privately. My legs felt like lead as I followed her down a hallway into a small office. Jessica closed the door and gestured to a chair. Mrs. Wilson, when was the last time you personally reviewed your accounts? My son helps me with my finances, I explained. My eyesight isn't what it used to be. Jessica nodded sympathetically. I understand. However, there's been some concerning activity on your accounts that I need to discuss with you. She turned her computer monitor so I could see it. This is your primary savings account, where your pension is deposited monthly. I stared at the screen. Balance. $147.32. That can't be right, I whispered. There should be over $400,000 in that account. Jessica's expression was grave. Mrs. Wilson, over the past 18 months, there have been systematic withdrawals from your accounts. Large ones. She pulled out several papers. These are the withdrawal slips, all signed with your name, but the handwriting appears inconsistent. My hands trembled as I examined the papers. The signatures looked similar to mine, but weren't. David had been practicing my signature for months. I remembered catching him once with my checkbook, claiming he was just making sure I had enough checks left. We've actually been monitoring your account for several months, Jessica continued. Our fraud department flagged unusual patterns, large withdrawals occurring regularly, transfers to accounts we've identified as belonging to David Wilson, cash withdrawals of exactly $9,900. Why $9,900? I asked, my mouth dry. Banks must report transactions of $10,000 or more to federal authorities. Keeping withdrawals just under that amount is a red flag for what we call structuring, a way to avoid reporting requirements. My chest tightened. The room seemed to spin. Are you saying my son has been stealing from me? Jessica's voice was gentle but firm. Based on our records, it appears so. Over $430,000 has been systematically removed from your accounts. We've already notified our fraud department, and they recommended contacting the police. However, we needed you to come in personally to confirm these weren't authorized transactions. I couldn't breathe properly. 40 years of careful saving, gone. My security, vanished. And by my own son's hand. Mrs. Wilson, are you all right? Would you like some water? Jessica looked concerned. I nodded mutely. While she stepped out briefly, I stared at the statements she'd left on the desk. Each withdrawal, each transfer, all while I trusted David was caring for me. All while he told me how forgetful I was becoming, how I needed his help, how lucky I was to have a son who cared so much. Here you go. Jessica returned with water and a box of tissues. I hadn't even realized I was crying. What happens now? I asked after taking a sip. That's partly up to you, Jessica said. Since this appears to be a case of family financial exploitation, you have options. We can help you file a police report, freeze your accounts, and begin fraud investigation proceedings. Our bank does have some protections for elderly customers, but I won't lie to you, recovering the full amount may be difficult. I felt a surge of something beyond sadness, anger. Pure, righteous anger. I want to pursue this, I said firmly. But first, I need to confront my son. Jessica looked concerned. Mrs. Wilson, in these situations, confrontations can sometimes escalate dangerously. Would you like me to call someone to accompany you? Or perhaps the police should be present. I shook my head. I need to see his face when I tell him I know. I need to understand how my son could do this to me. Deep down, I think I was still hoping for some explanation, some misunderstanding that would make this nightmare disappear. I understand, Jessica said, though her expression suggested she didn't agree. Please take my card. Call me directly after you've spoken with him, or immediately if you feel unsafe at any point. We'll need to take immediate steps to protect what's left of your assets. I clutched her card like a lifeline as I left the bank. The bright spring day seemed to mock my shattered world as I hailed a taxi home, rehearsing what I would say to the son who had betrayed me so completely. The taxi dropped me off at my modest 2-story colonial, the home Robert and I had purchased 30 years ago, where we'd raised our children. David's sleek black BMW sat in the driveway, a car I now realized I had probably paid for without knowing it. I found him in the kitchen, laptop open on the table, talking enthusiastically on his phone about a resort in Cabo San Lucas. Yeah, the deluxe oceanfront suite. For 2 weeks in July, he looked up, saw me, and quickly ended his call. Hey Mom, how was the eye doctor? Need me to pick up any prescriptions? His casual tone made my blood boil. David, I said, keeping my voice steady, we need to talk about my bank accounts. He barely glanced up from his laptop. Everything's fine, Mom. I paid all the bills yesterday. Then why is there only $147 in my savings account? That got his attention. His fingers froze over the keyboard. What are you talking about? I just came from the bank, David. I know what you've done. He closed his laptop slowly, his expression changing from surprise to something harder, colder. You shouldn't have gone to the bank. Your memory isn't reliable anymore. My memory is perfectly fine, I said, my voice rising. Where is my money, David? Over $430,000 gone. My entire pension savings. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with eyes so like his father's, yet holding none of Robert's warmth. It's not really gone, Mom. It's just being put to better use. Better use? That money was my retirement, my security. David shrugged. And I'm your son. Your only security. That money would have been mine eventually anyway. I'm just taking my inheritance early. The casual way he said it, like he was discussing borrowing a cup of sugar, stunned me. That's theft, David. You stole from me. He laughed then, a sound that chilled me. Theft? I've been taking care of you for 3 years. Driving you around, handling your affairs, living in this outdated house. I deserve compensation. Compensation? I could barely speak through my shock. I gave you a place to live. I'm your mother. And I'm stuck babysitting you while Susan lives her perfect life in Seattle. He stood up, towering over me. Do you know what I could have done with my life if I didn't have to worry about you? The opportunities I've missed? No one asked you to move in with me, I said, fighting back tears. You said it was temporary. Nothing's temporary when you're dealing with aging parents. His voice was bitter. You're getting worse, Mom. More confused. Forgetting things. Soon you'll need full-time care. Who do you think will pay for that? Susan? She barely calls. I'm not confused. You've been gaslighting me, making me think I was losing my memory when you were stealing from me all along. David's expression darkened. Watch yourself, Mom. One call from me about your mental state, and you could find yourself declared incompetent. Who do you think the courts will believe? A confused old woman, or her concerned son with power of attorney? You don't have power of attorney, I gasped. His smile was triumphant. Check again. You signed it last month. You probably don't remember. My mind raced. Had I signed something without reading it properly? David had presented so many documents over the months. Always when I was tired. Always just routine paperwork that needed my signature urgently. "I'm calling Susan," I said, reaching for my phone. David snatched it away. "Susan doesn't need to be involved in this. She's busy with her perfect life and perfect husband. This is between you and me. Give me back my phone." "Or what?" he taunted. "Will you call the police on your own son? Tell them you voluntarily gave me access to your accounts and now you're having regrets? They'll think you're senile." I stared at this stranger wearing my son's face. "What happened to you, David? How could you do this to me?" "Life happened, Mom. Reality happened. Do you know what it's like trying to build a life when nothing ever goes your way? When your sister gets all the breaks while you get nothing? The least I deserve is financial security. By stealing from your mother? What would your father say?" At the mention of Robert, something flickered in David's eyes. Shame, perhaps, or anger. It vanished quickly. "Dad's not here, is he? He left us both. He didn't choose to die." "No, but he chose to leave everything in your name instead of setting up trusts for his children. He never thought I could manage money responsibly. And he was right." I was shouting now, years of pent-up frustration erupting. "Look at what you've done. You've stolen my security, betrayed my trust, and for what? Gambling? That resort you were booking?" David's expression hardened. "You don't get to judge me. Not anymore." He picked up his laptop. "This conversation is over. You should lie down. You're getting hysterical, and it's not good for someone your age to get so upset." "I want you out of my house," I said, my voice shaking. "Today. Now." He laughed. "This is my house too. My name's on the utilities, remember, for convenience?" His smile was cruel. "You might even find my name on the deed if you look closely enough." Horror washed over me as I realized the extent of his manipulation. "What else have you taken from me, David?" "Nothing that wouldn't have been mine eventually." He walked to the living room and picked up an empty spot on the mantel. Dad's Rolex fetched a nice price, though. As did Grandma's silver service. Family heirlooms should stay in the family, don't you think? Or at least, their value should. I felt physically ill. The watch Robert had cherished, the silver my mother had left me gone. Along with my savings, my security, and my trust in my own son. "I'm leaving," I said, grabbing my purse. "When I come back, I want you gone." "Or what?" David challenged. "This is my house now, Mom. You might want to start looking at nursing homes. I hear Sunny Pines has openings. Nothing fancy, but Medicaid should cover it." I didn't trust myself to speak. I walked out the front door, tears blinding me, and headed straight to Eleanor's house next door. My friend of 20 years took one look at my face and ushered me inside without a word. "He's stolen everything," I sobbed as she made tea. "My pension, heirlooms, possibly even my house. My own son." Eleanor called Susan immediately, putting her on speakerphone. My daughter's shock quickly turned to action. "I'm booking a flight right now, Mom. Don't go back to the house alone. And we're calling the police." As Eleanor and Susan took charge, I sat in numbed silence, wondering how I could have been so blind to the monster my son had become, and what would happen to me now that my financial security was gone. The next morning, Susan arrived on a red-eye flight from Seattle, her face tight with worry and barely suppressed anger. Together with Eleanor, we returned to the bank to meet with Jessica Miller and her team. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm glad you came back," Jessica said, ushering us into a conference room where two other people waited. A serious-looking woman, introduced as Diane from the fraud department, and a young man named Tyler who specialized in elder financial abuse cases. For the next 2 hours, they walked me through everything they'd discovered. David had been systematic in his theft, starting with small withdrawals and gradually increasing amounts as he gained confidence. He had opened multiple credit cards in my name. He had intercepted and destroyed bank statements. Most disturbingly, he had indeed filed paperwork for power of attorney, using a document with my forged signature. "The good news," Jessica said, "is that we flagged this power of attorney as suspicious. It hasn't been fully processed in our system." Susan, who had been taking detailed notes, looked up. "What about the house? Did he try to transfer the deed?" Tyler nodded grimly. We found evidence of an attempted title transfer filed with the county 3 weeks ago. Fortunately, it required notarization that appears to have been falsified. We've already notified the county recorder's office. My head swam with the scope of David's betrayal. What happens now? I asked. We've already frozen all accounts to prevent further withdrawals, Diane explained. We're documenting everything for law enforcement. Speaking of which, she glanced at her watch. Detective Martinez should be here any minute to take your formal statement. Have you ever had that moment where you realize your life is about to change dramatically? As I sat in that conference room with these strangers working to help me, I felt both terrified and strangely liberated. After years of David's manipulation, people were finally believing me, helping me. If you've ever been gaslighted by someone you trusted, you know how powerful that validation feels. Drop a comment below if you've experienced something similar. It helps to know we're not alone in these struggles. And if you're finding value in my story, please consider subscribing. There's so much more to share about what happened next. Detective Martinez turned out to be a compassionate woman in her 40s who specialized in elder abuse cases. She recorded my statement, her expression growing increasingly somber as I detailed David's systematic deception. Unfortunately, Mrs. Wilson, what you're describing is something we see all too frequently, she said. Family financial exploitation is one of the fastest growing forms of elder abuse, but also one of the most underreported because victims are ashamed or afraid to report family members. Will I get my money back? I asked, the question that had been haunting me since yesterday. Detective Martinez exchanged glances with Jessica. We'll certainly try. We'll be obtaining warrants to track the money flow and freeze any assets we can identify. But I need to be honest with you, recovery can be challenging, especially if the money has been spent on gambling, travel, or other intangibles. Susan, who had been quietly seething beside me, spoke up. What about criminal charges? I want him prosecuted to the fullest extent. Based on what we've documented, your brother could be facing multiple felony charges, Detective Martinez confirmed. Financial elder abuse, fraud, forgery, identity theft, and possibly money laundering, depending on how he moved the funds. These are serious crimes with potential prison time. The thought of my son in prison sent a wave of conflicting emotions through me: sadness, guilt, but also a sense of justice that I couldn't ignore. From the bank, Susan and I went directly to meet with Kathleen Johnson, an elder law attorney recommended by Jessica. Kathleen's office was warm and inviting, clearly designed to put anxious seniors at ease. First things first, she said. After reviewing my situation, we need to legally revoke any access David has to your accounts, property, or legal affairs. Then we need to secure what assets remain and establish protective measures going forward. The next several days passed in a blur of meetings, paperwork, and legal proceedings. We filed for an emergency restraining order against David. We worked with credit bureaus to flag my accounts for fraud and freeze my credit. We changed every password, account number, and security question. We filed to invalidate the fraudulent power of attorney, and we began the process of formally evicting David from my home. Throughout all of this, David continued his campaign of manipulation. He called repeatedly until we blocked his number. He sent emails accusing me of ingratitude and mental instability. When those went unanswered, he began contacting family, friends, and distant relatives, telling them I was suffering from dementia and that Susan had swooped in to take control of my finances for herself. Some believed him. My cousin Patricia called, concerned that I was being manipulated by Susan. My former neighbor Bill stopped by Eleanor's house, asking if I needed rescuing from my daughter. Each time, I had to explain the humiliating truth. My son had systematically robbed me of nearly everything. The hardest part was deciding to press criminal charges. You don't have to do this if it's too painful, Susan assured me. We can focus on civil recovery instead. But Detective Martinez was gently insistent. Mrs. Wilson, without criminal charges, it's much harder to recover assets. Additionally, without consequences, your son is likely to victimize others, possibly other elderly individuals. That thought that David might do this to someone else's mother resolved my hesitation. Press the charges, I told Detective Martinez. All of them. Kathleen, my attorney, nodded approvingly. You're not just standing up for yourself, Margaret. You're standing up for every vulnerable senior who's been exploited by someone they trusted. Her words gave me strength, but they couldn't erase the grief. Every night, alone in Eleanor's guest room, I cried for the son I thought I knew, for the family that was now irrevocably broken, and for the financial security that had vanished. Susan found me one night, sitting in the dark. "Mom," she said, sitting beside me, "this isn't your fault." "I let him in," I whispered. "I trusted him. I ignored all the warning signs, because he's your son. Because you love him." She took my hand. "That's not a character flaw, Mom. That's being human." In that moment, I was intensely grateful for Susan. She had put her life on hold, taken leave from her job, left her husband temporarily in Seattle to help me through this crisis. The daughter I'd thought was distant had proven to be my strongest ally. "I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner," she said, as if reading my thoughts. "I should have visited more, should have noticed something was wrong. David made sure I was isolated," I reminded her. "He intercepted calls, made excuses for why I couldn't visit. You couldn't have known." Together, we began the painful process of rebuilding my life, one step at a time, as the legal machinery ground slowly forward toward justice. The morning after we filed the restraining order, Susan and I accompanied the sheriff's deputies to my house to serve David with eviction papers. I hadn't been home in nearly a week and was anxious about what we might find. David answered the door looking disheveled and angry. His shock at seeing me with law enforcement quickly morphed into theatrical concern. "Mom, thank God. I've been so worried." He reached for me, but one of the deputies stepped between us. "Mr. Wilson, we're here to serve you with legal documents," the deputy said formally, extending the paperwork. "This is a restraining order prohibiting you from contacting Margaret Wilson, and this is a notice of eviction. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises." David's face contorted with rage. "You can't evict me from my own mother's house. She's not mentally competent to make these decisions." The court disagreed, the deputy replied calmly. "You need to take these documents and begin making arrangements to leave. This is your doing, isn't it?" David snarled at Susan. "You've always been jealous that Mom and I are closer. Now you've manipulated her into this." Susan remained admirably composed. "The bank statements and forged documents did the manipulating. David, you did this to yourself." Under the deputy's supervision, David was allowed to collect some personal belongings while we waited outside. 45 minutes later, he stormed out with 2 suitcases and a laptop bag, glaring at me as he passed. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "When you're alone in some state-run nursing home, remember who tried to take care of you." After he drove away, we entered the house. I wasn't prepared for what we found. The place had been ransacked. Drawers pulled out and emptied, closets in disarray, empty spaces on walls where artwork had hung. My jewelry box was empty, not that I'd had much of value, but even my costume pieces were gone. Family photo albums were missing, the silver candlesticks from my wedding, Robert's golf trophies. "He's been selling everything not nailed down," Susan whispered, surveying the damage. The most painful discovery came in Robert's study, which I'd preserved largely as he left it. The antique desk that had been in his family for generations was gone. The built-in bookshelves stood empty. Even the leather chair where he used to read had disappeared. "We can file an additional report for the stolen property," the deputy advised, clearly uncomfortable witnessing our distress. That evening, as Susan and I began the overwhelming task of cataloging what was missing, David launched his counteroffensive. He created a GoFundMe page titled "Help a Son Save His Mother from Elder Abuse" that painted Susan and me as the villains. He claimed I was suffering from dementia and that Susan had swooped in from across the country to seize control of Mom's assets while throwing her devoted caregiver son onto the streets. Within hours, the page had been shared hundreds of times. People we knew, distant family, old neighbors, former colleagues who didn't know the full story were commenting and donating. David had always been charismatic and convincing. Then came the social media onslaught. Fake accounts appeared on Facebook purporting to be me, posting rambling, confused messages that made me appear mentally unstable. David contacted the local newspaper with his version of events, though thankfully, the reporter called me for comment and declined to run the story after hearing both sides. The situation escalated when David violated the restraining order by showing up at Eleanor's house, demanding to speak with me. When Eleanor refused to let him in, he became belligerent, shouting accusations until neighbors called the police. By the time officers arrived, David had left, but the incident shook me deeply. "We're not safe here," Susan decided. "He knows where Eleanor lives. We need to move you somewhere he won't think to look." Through Kathleen's connections, we found a small apartment in a secure building across town, available for short-term lease. We moved with minimal belongings, not telling anyone but Eleanor and my legal team of our new location. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, they did. David's GoFundMe campaign had raised over $7,000 from people who believed his story. Emboldened, he escalated his campaign, appearing on a local morning show to tearfully describe how his mentally declining mother had been turned against him by his money-hungry sister. "I've dedicated the last 3 years to caring for her," he said, his voice breaking on cue. "I gave up my career, my relationships, everything. And now I'm homeless while she's been convinced to press charges against me." The interviewer, clearly moved, asked what he hoped would happen. "I just want my mother back," David said. "I want her to get the professional help she needs. And I want to be allowed to care for her again. She's all I have." Watching the segment on Susan's tablet, I felt physically ill. How can he lie like this? How can he sit there and pretend to care about me after what he's done? "Because he's desperate," Susan said grimly. "And desperate people are dangerous." Her words proved prophetic the very next day, when David violated the restraining order again, this time more aggressively. Susan and I had been meeting with Detective Martinez at the police station to review new evidence when an officer rushed in. "Detective, we just got a call from the security desk at Mrs. Wilson's apartment building. Her son is there, demanding to be let up to her unit. He's becoming threatening with the staff." Detective Martinez immediately dispatched officers, but by the time they arrived, David had already been arrested by building security. He was intoxicated and had been carrying a bag containing duct tape, rope, and printouts of bus schedules to Canada. "We believe he may have been planning to abduct you, Mrs. Wilson," Detective Martinez said gently. "The district attorney will be adding additional charges." That night, as Susan and I sat in our temporary apartment under police protection, I mourned not just my lost savings, but the son I thought I knew. Had the kind little boy who once brought me dandelions and handmade Mother's Day cards been a fiction? Had the young man who tearfully promised his dying father he'd look after me been playing a role all along? Or had something broken inside him, turning love to resentment, and finally to something darker? I had no answers, only grief, as David sat in a jail cell and I sat in a strange apartment, both of us prisoners of his making. In the weeks following David's arrest, the full scope of his betrayal came to light. The bank's forensic accountants pored over every transaction, credit application, and account movement going back 5 years. What they uncovered was even more disturbing than I had initially realized. David's theft hadn't begun 3 years ago when he moved in with me. It had started subtly shortly after Robert died, with small loans that were never repaid and bills he offered to pay with money I provided, but pocketed instead. By the time he moved in, he had already misappropriated nearly $30,000. Once he had direct access to my accounts, the theft accelerated dramatically. "We've traced most of the major withdrawals," Jessica explained during one of our regular meetings at the bank. "Some went directly to online gambling sites. Some were transferred to accounts in David's name at other banks. A significant portion, over $150,000, was withdrawn as cashier's checks made out to various entities." "What entities?" Susan asked. Jessica slid a paper across the table. "Primarily these 3. Sunset Investments, Coastal Holdings, and Mountain View Properties." Kathleen, who had accompanied us to the meeting, frowned. "Shell companies?" "It appears so," Jessica confirmed. "All 3 were established in Delaware within the last 2 years, with David Wilson listed as the sole officer." "Money laundering," Detective Martinez noted, shaking her head. "He was trying to hide the source of the funds." The final accounting was staggering. $437,890 $2 stolen from my accounts. Another, $86,000 in fraudulent credit card debt created in my name. Personal property valued at approximately $120,000 sold or pawned. And perhaps most shocking, a reverse mortgage application submitted on my house using forged documents, which would have provided David with another $240,000 had it been approved. In total, we're looking at attempted theft of nearly $900,000, the forensic accountant concluded. It's one of the most comprehensive cases of elder financial exploitation I've seen. As devastating as these revelations were, they were accompanied by unexpected discoveries that offered some hope. An evidence search of David's storage unit revealed many family heirlooms he hadn't yet sold, including photo albums, Robert's golf trophies, and even his desk, disassembled but intact. There were also financial records that proved crucial to the investigation notebooks where David had actually tracked his theft, practiced my signature, and listed items to sell with their expected values. Most disturbing was a folder labeled Phase 2, containing research on nursing homes with the poorest ratings and lowest costs, along with draft documents for having me declared mentally incompetent. According to his timeline, I would have been placed in a facility within 3 months, giving him complete control of my assets. He really planned to put me in a bad nursing home, I said incredulously as Detective Martinez showed me the documents. His own mother. Unfortunately, Mrs. Wilson, this is a common pattern in these cases, she explained gently. Once the perpetrator has exhausted the available liquid assets, they often seek to gain control of larger assets like homes through guardianship. During this investigative period, we also connected with David's ex-wife Stephanie, whom I hadn't spoken to since their divorce 7 years earlier. She confirmed what I had begun to suspect. David had financially exploited her as well. It started small, Stephanie told us over coffee. A credit card I didn't remember applying for, cash missing from our joint account. When I questioned him, he'd get so angry that I began to doubt myself. By the time I filed for divorce, he had drained our savings and maxed out cards in my name. It took me 5 years to rebuild my credit. Why didn't you ever tell me? I asked. Stephanie looked down. I tried, once. You defended him so strongly, said I was bitter about the divorce. After that, it seemed pointless. Her words stung with truth. I had chosen to believe my son over his wife had dismissed her concerns as post-divorce animosity. How differently things might have turned out if I'd listened. As we dug deeper, we discovered David had also borrowed money from several elderly neighbors, using various pretexts: a business opportunity, medical bills, temporary cash flow issues. None had been repaid. 2 neighbors, both widows in their 70s, had given him access to their computers to help with technical issues and later discovered unauthorized online purchases. He was working his way through the vulnerable seniors in the neighborhood, Susan said grimly. You were just his primary target. While David sat in jail, unable to make the substantial bail set by the judge due to our asset freeze on his accounts, we continued piecing together the puzzle of his deception. Susan and I spent hours with Kathleen, Detective Martinez, and the forensic accountants, tracing money flows and documenting every instance of fraud. The most painful part was reading David's emails and text messages obtained through search warrants. In them, he referred to me as the ATM and boasted to friends about how easy it was to manipulate old people. He had detailed plans for spending his inheritance, including a beachfront condo in Florida and a yacht. Nowhere in these communications was there a hint of guilt or concern for my welfare. I don't understand, I confessed to Susan one night. How could he become this person? Where did we go wrong with him? Susan sat beside me on the couch in our temporary apartment. Mom, this isn't about your parenting. David made choices terrible, calculated choices. Some people just break somehow. As the case against David grew stronger, his lawyer approached the district attorney about a plea deal. The DA's office, however, was unwilling to offer significant leniency given the extent of the evidence and the vulnerability of the victim, me. They're seeking a minimum sentence of 8 years, Kathleen informed us. David's attorney is pushing back, arguing for probation and restitution only. What do you think will happen? I asked. With the evidence we have? He's looking at prison time, Margaret. The question is how much. The reality that my son would likely go to prison hit me hard. Despite everything he'd done, a part of me still saw him as the little boy who'd needed me. But another part, the part that had been betrayed, manipulated, and nearly destroyed, knew that justice required consequences. As the investigation continued, David began writing me letters from jail, long, emotionally manipulative missives that alternated between blaming me, "If you'd just trusted me with your finances like Dad wanted," blaming Susan, "She's always been jealous of our relationship," and pleading for forgiveness, "I've made terrible mistakes, but I'm still your son." Susan wanted to throw them away unread, but I insisted on seeing them. "I need to understand," I told her. "I need to see him clearly for who he really is." And in those letters, through the manipulation and self-pity, I finally did see the truth. My son had become someone I no longer recognized, someone who viewed me not as a mother to love but as a resource to exploit. It was the most painful realization of my life, but also, strangely, the most liberating. 6 months after that fateful day at the bank, David's case went to trial. Though his attorney had pushed hard for a plea deal, the district attorney, impressed by the mountain of evidence and moved by my story, refused to offer terms David would accept. And so we found ourselves in a downtown courtroom on a crisp October morning. I'd never been inside a courtroom before. The formality of it, the polished wood, the stern-faced bailiff, the black-robed judge made my knees weak. Susan held my arm as we made our way to seats behind the prosecutor's table. David was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. He'd lost weight in jail, and his usually neat hair had grown shaggy. Despite everything, my heart clenched at the sight of my son in custody. He spotted me and attempted a smile that I couldn't return. The prosecutor, Andrea Kimball, was a formidable woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and unwavering confidence. "Mrs. Wilson has been victimized by the one person who should have protected her most," she said in her opening statement. "The evidence will show that the defendant, David Wilson, engaged in a systematic, premeditated scheme to defraud his elderly mother of her life savings through deception, forgery, and manipulation." David's attorney, a rumpled man named Greenberg, painted a different picture: a devoted son who had sacrificed his career to care for his aging mother, who may have made financial missteps, but always with the family's best interests at heart. "This is a family matter that has been tragically misconstrued," he insisted. "Not a criminal enterprise." For 3 grueling days, I listened as the prosecution methodically presented evidence of David's crimes. Bank records showing the pattern of theft, forged documents with my signature, emails where he referred to me as a cash cow, statements from neighbors he'd borrowed from, testimony from financial experts about the sophisticated money laundering operation. The most difficult moment came when I had to take the stand myself. As I walked to the witness box, I caught David's eye. There was no remorse there, only calculation. Under Miss Kimball's gentle questioning, I recounted how David had isolated me, gaslighted me into doubting my own memory, and systematically taken control of every aspect of my finances. I described discovering the theft, confronting him, and his chilling response. "He said it was his inheritance anyway," I testified, my voice shaking, "that he was just taking it early." During cross-examination, Greenberg tried to suggest I had willingly given David control of my finances, that I had authorized the transfers, that my memory might be unreliable. But the documentation was too thorough, the evidence too overwhelming. On the trial's 4th day, something unexpected happened. After the lunch recess, Greenberg requested a meeting with the prosecutor. An hour later, they returned to the courtroom with news. David had agreed to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for the prosecutor's recommendation of a slightly reduced sentence. The defendant has agreed to plead guilty to 27 felony counts, including elder financial abuse, fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement, Miss Kimball announced to the court. The judge turned to David. "Mr. Wilson, do you understand that by pleading guilty, you waive your right to continue this trial and your right to appeal?" "Yes, Your Honor," David replied, his voice flat. "And are you entering this plea voluntarily? Without coercion?" "Yes, Your Honor." The judge nodded. "Very well. The court accepts your guilty plea. Sentencing will be scheduled for 2 weeks from today." As David was led away, he turned to look at me one last time. I wanted to see something. Anything in his eyes that resembled the son I had raised. but all I saw was a stranger. The sentencing hearing was even more emotional. I had prepared a victim impact statement with Kathleen's help, trying to capture in words the devastation David's betrayal had caused, not just financially, but emotionally and psychologically. The defendant didn't just steal my money, I read, my voice growing stronger with each word. He stole my security, my independence, my trust, and my peace of mind. He stole my belief in family loyalty and my faith in my own judgment. Most painfully, he stole my relationship with my son because the person who could do these things is not the son I thought I knew. David was given an opportunity to speak before sentencing. He stood, adjusted his jumpsuit, and cleared his throat. I recognize that my actions have caused pain, he began, his voice lacking emotion. I made choices that I now regret. While I always believed I would eventually repay the funds, I understand that my methods were inappropriate. I ask the court for leniency so that I can begin making restitution to my mother. Not once did he look at me. Not once did he actually say, "I'm sorry." Judge Harriman, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, was not impressed. "Mr. Wilson," she said, "rarely has this court seen a more calculated, cold-blooded exploitation of a vulnerable victim, particularly one to whom you owed a duty of care and loyalty. You systematically defrauded your own mother, isolated her from support systems, and planned to discard her in a substandard facility once you had extracted all possible financial benefit." She adjusted her glasses, looking directly at David. Society rightly views the exploitation of elderly individuals as particularly reprehensible. Your actions represent an extraordinary breach of trust and a complete abdication of filial responsibility. David stared straight ahead, his expression unreadable. "Taking into account your guilty plea and lack of prior criminal record, I hereby sentence you to 6 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You are ordered to pay full restitution in the amount of $643,892, representing the documented financial losses. Additionally, you are permanently prohibited from serving as a fiduciary, guardian, or power of attorney for any individual." The gavel struck with finality. David was led away without looking back. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. The case had attracted significant media attention, partly due to David's earlier television appearance claiming I was mentally incompetent. "Mrs. Wilson," one reporter called out, "how do you feel about your son's sentence?" I paused, Susan's supportive hand on my arm. "Justice has been served," I said finally, "but there are no winners here. Financial exploitation of the elderly is a growing epidemic that destroys families and lives. If sharing my story helps even one person recognize the warning signs and get help, then some good will have come from this tragedy." That evening, alone in the apartment that still didn't feel like home, I received an unexpected phone call. It was a woman named Patricia, a stranger to me. "Mrs. Wilson, I saw you on the news," she said, her voice trembling. "My daughter has been managing my finances since my husband died. Things haven't seemed right, but I've been afraid to question her. After hearing your story, I called my bank today. I was right to be concerned. She was the first of many. As my case received media coverage, other elderly victims reached out, some to share similar experiences, others seeking advice on how to protect themselves. Each call reinforced what Detective Martinez had told me months earlier. I wasn't alone, and by speaking out, I was helping others. The day after sentencing, I received one last letter from David. Unlike his previous manipulative missives, this one was brief and cold. "You've chosen money over your son. I hope it keeps you warm at night." I showed it to Susan, who wanted to throw it away. But I kept it as a reminder not of David's cruelty, but of my own resilience. I had chosen truth over deception, justice over manipulation, and self-respect over exploitation. Those were choices I could live with, even through the grief of losing my son not to prison, but to the person he had chosen to become long before his sentencing. With David's legal case concluded, the long process of rebuilding my life began in earnest. The first order of business was finding a permanent place to live. My house, though legally still mine, held too many painful memories. With Susan's help, I decided to sell it and purchase a smaller, more manageable condominium in a secure building with a community of active seniors. Are you sure about this, Mom? Susan asked as we toured what would become my new home. You loved that house. I loved the home it used to be, I corrected her. Before David turned it into something else. I need a fresh start. Financial recovery proved more challenging. Though David had been ordered to pay full restitution, the reality was that most of my money was gone, gambled away, spent on luxury items that had since depreciated or hidden in accounts we couldn't locate. The sale of my house provided some capital, but at 68, I was essentially starting over financially with a fraction of the retirement savings I had spent decades accumulating. Jessica Miller and the team at First National Bank proved invaluable during this period. The bank's insurance covered $150,000 of my losses, not everything, but enough to provide some breathing room. We're also implementing new protections for elderly customers based on what happened to you, Jessica told me during one of our meetings. Enhanced fraud detection, dual approval requirements for large withdrawals, and regular welfare checks for senior account holders. My silver lining, I said, managing a small smile. If my experience helps protect others, that matters. With Jessica's recommendation, I began working with a financial advisor named Marcus, who specialized in helping seniors recover from financial setbacks. He helped me create a realistic budget, invest my remaining assets conservatively, and apply for benefits I qualified for. You're in better shape than many people in your situation, Marcus assured me. You have your health, a supportable pension, Medicare, and a small investment portfolio. With careful management, you'll maintain your independence. Independence became my watchword. After years of David gradually taking control of every aspect of my life, I was determined to reclaim my autonomy. I enrolled in a computer class at the Senior Center to learn how to manage my own online banking, bill payments, and email. I got a new smartphone and learned to use it properly. I even took a defensive driving course to renew my confidence behind the wheel. Susan remained in town longer than planned, eventually taking a remote position with her Seattle company so she could help me transition. Our relationship, which had grown distant during David's influence, blossomed into something stronger and deeper than before. I'm thinking of relocating permanently, she told me one evening, as we shared dinner on my new balcony. Michael could transfer to the company's Midwest office. We'd be just an hour away. Because you're worried about me? I asked, concerned I was becoming a burden to both my children, though in very different ways. No, Mom, Susan said, reaching for my hand. Because I've realized how much I've missed you. David didn't just isolate you from others, he isolated us from each other. That conversation marked a turning point in my emotional recovery. I had lost a son, at least the son I thought I had, but I had regained a daughter. And through Susan, I reconnected with my son-in-law Michael and began building a relationship with him based on genuine interaction rather than the superficial holiday exchanges David had allowed. 3 months after moving into my new home, I received an invitation that both terrified and intrigued me. Detective Martinez asked if I would speak at a conference on elder abuse prevention. Your story is powerful, Mrs. Wilson, she said, and you articulate it in a way that resonates with people. Would you consider sharing it with law enforcement officers, social workers, and financial professionals? My first instinct was to decline. I was still processing my trauma, still waking up some nights in cold sweats from nightmares about David's betrayal. But then I remembered Patricia's call after the sentencing, and the others who had reached out after seeing my story in the news. I'll do it, I told Detective Martinez. If it helps someone else, I'll do it. That first speech led to others. I joined a local advocacy group for elder abuse prevention, eventually becoming a peer counselor for other victims. I worked with banks on developing stronger protections for vulnerable customers. I even testified before state legislators considering stronger penalties for elder financial exploitation. In these new roles, I found purpose that helped counter the grief and shame that had initially overwhelmed me. Every person I helped, every policy I influenced, felt like reclaiming a piece of what David had taken from me. The most unexpected part of my rebuilding came 6 months after my move, when I received a call from Memorial Hospital, where I'd worked as a nurse for 40 years. We've expanded our patient advocacy program, explained Janet, my former colleague who now ran the department. We're looking for experienced healthcare professionals who can work part-time helping patients navigate the system. I immediately thought of you, Margaret. Returning to nursing, even in this limited capacity, felt like coming home. Twice a week, I donned a hospital badge and used my knowledge to help vulnerable patients understand their care, access resources, and communicate effectively with medical staff. The work was fulfilling and reminded me that I still had valuable contributions to make. As my first anniversary of independence approached, I faced a decision I had been avoiding: what to do about David. He had written several times from prison, each letter a mixed bag of subtle manipulation and hints at remorse. His counselor had contacted me about participating in a restorative justice program that would involve mediated communication between us. "You don't owe him anything," Susan reminded me when I shared my uncertainty. "Not 1 minute of your time or ounce of your emotional energy." "I know," I said, "but I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it for me. I need to understand, if I ever can." With Susan's support and my therapist's guidance, I agreed to exchange monitored letters with David through the prison's restorative justice program. His first genuine letter, not performatively remorseful or subtly blaming, but genuinely reflective, arrived on my 69th birthday. "I've been diagnosed with a gambling addiction and narcissistic personality traits," he wrote. "That's not an excuse, but maybe an explanation. I've started to understand the damage I've caused, not just financially, but to our family. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope someday you might find peace." It wasn't a Hollywood reconciliation or a miraculous transformation. It was small, imperfect, and tentative. But it was something I could work with as I continued building my new life. One not defined by victimhood or betrayal, but by resilience, purpose, and carefully rebuilt trust. 1 year to the day after my first meeting with Jessica Miller at First National Bank, I received a call asking me to come in for a meeting. Susan, who was visiting for the weekend, offered to accompany me. "Is everything all right with my accounts?" I asked, immediately concerned. Even a year later, financial matters still triggered anxiety. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Wilson," Jessica assured me. "I just have some information I'd prefer to share in person." The bank looked the same as it had that fateful day when my world collapsed, the same marble counters, the same hushed conversations, the same line of people waiting for tellers. But I was different. The frightened, devastated woman who had learned of her son's betrayal had been replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and more cautious, but also more purposeful. Jessica greeted us warmly and ushered us into her office, where 2 other people waited. Tyler from the fraud department and a woman I didn't recognize who was introduced as Vanessa Brennan, the bank's regional director. "Mrs. Wilson," Vanessa began once we were seated, "I want to start by thanking you for your cooperation and patience throughout this difficult process. Your case has actually prompted our bank to completely revamp our elder protection protocols. I'm glad something positive came from it," I said, wondering why the regional director would meet personally to tell me this. Jessica and Tyler exchanged glances before Jessica continued. "We've been working closely with our insurance providers and the recovery team tracking your son's finances. As you know, we were able to provide initial coverage of $150,000 for your losses." I nodded. That money had been crucial in helping me establish my new life. "What you don't know," Vanessa said, "is that your case triggered a comprehensive review of our policies regarding elder financial exploitation. The board determined that our previous safeguards were insufficient and that in cases like yours, we had a greater responsibility." She placed a folder on the desk and slid it toward me. "Our insurance partners have agreed to cover an additional $175,000 of your documented losses." I stared at the folder, unable to speak. Susan reached over and squeezed my hand. "Additionally," Tyler added, "the team tracking your son's gambling partners was able to secure a settlement from 3 online casinos that failed to properly verify the source of funds. That settlement amounts to $82,000, which will be paid directly to you as restitution." "That's," I began, my voice catching. "That's over $250,000. Jessica nodded. "It won't replace everything you lost, Mrs. Wilson. But combined with your existing resources, it should provide substantial security for your retirement." I opened the folder with trembling hands to find documentation of the additional insurance payment and the casino settlement, along with a personal letter from the bank's CEO acknowledging the extraordinary circumstances of my case and the bank's commitment to preventing similar situations. We've also developed a new program based on what happened to you, Vanessa explained. It's called the Senior Security Initiative. It includes enhanced fraud detection, financial education for seniors, and a dedicated helpline for elderly customers who suspect exploitation. Your experience is literally changing banking policy, Susan said, her eyes shining with pride. As I absorbed this unexpected turn of events, Jessica handed me a business card. There's one more thing, Mrs. Wilson. This is Emma Lawson from the State Attorney General's office. She heads their new Elder Justice Task Force, and she'd like to meet with you. They're developing training programs for law enforcement and financial institutions. And they're looking for someone with your experience and communication skills to help lead community outreach. It was overwhelming. Not just the financial relief, but the opportunity to transform my traumatic experience into something that could help protect others. As we left the bank, check in hand and possibilities swirling, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before David's betrayal: hope, not just for my own future, but for my ability to make a difference. That evening, Susan and I celebrated with a special dinner at my condominium. As we raised our glasses in a toast, the doorbell rang. It was a delivery flowers from my new neighbors in the building, with a card inviting me to join their book club. "Look at you," Susan said with a smile. "New home, new purpose, new friends, financial security, and all because you were brave enough to fight back." "Not just me," I corrected her. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, without Jessica, without everyone who helped me when I was at my lowest." The holidays approached, my first full seasonal cycle in my new home. I decorated thoughtfully, using ornaments Susan had rescued from my old house. I baked cookies for my neighbors and volunteered at a local shelter. I had dinner at Susan and Michael's new home. They had indeed relocated to be closer to me, and spent Christmas morning video chatting with friends from my advocacy group. A week after New Year's, I received a letter from David. Unlike his previous communications, this one felt different, less self-focused, more genuinely reflective. "I've been working with a therapist here," he wrote, "trying to understand why I did what I did. It's not easy facing who I've become. I know it's too much to ask for forgiveness, but I want you to know that I understand now what I destroyed, and I live with that knowledge every day." It wasn't a Hollywood reconciliation, and I harbored no illusions about our relationship ever returning to normal. But it was the first communication that didn't leave me feeling manipulated or drained. Perhaps it was a small step toward some kind of resolution, however limited. My work with the Elder Justice Task Force began in earnest that February. 3 days a week, I joined other advocates in developing educational materials, speaking at community centers, and training bank employees to recognize signs of exploitation. My nursing background proved unexpectedly valuable, as I could speak to both the financial and health impacts of elder abuse. "You found your second calling, Mom," Susan observed one evening after I'd enthusiastically recounted a successful presentation to a seniors group. "I suppose I have," I agreed. "It's strange how life works. A year ago, I thought I'd lost everything. Now I have purpose, security, and deeper relationships than before." In March, I received my first quarterly statement showing my rebuilt investment portfolio, my secure pension, and my new financial safeguards. Marcus, my financial advisor, had helped me establish a system where major transactions required dual approval from both me and a trusted third party, Susan, in my case. My accounts were monitored by specialized software designed to detect unusual patterns, and I had learned to manage my own online banking, checking my balances daily with a vigilance born of hard experience. Looking at that statement, seeing the concrete evidence of my recovery, I felt a surge of pride. I had survived my son's betrayal. I had rebuilt my life. I had turned tragedy into purpose. And while the scars remained, I still had moments of paralyzing doubt, still woke sometimes from nightmares of helplessness. They no longer defined me. As spring bloomed around my new home, I sat on my balcony with my morning coffee, watching the sunrise and reflecting on my journey. From devastation to rebuilding, from victim to advocate, from isolation to community. It hadn't been easy, and the path forward would still have difficult moments, especially concerning my complex feelings about David. But I had discovered a strength in myself I never knew existed, and a capacity for renewal I hadn't thought possible at my age. Has my story resonated with you? Perhaps you've experienced betrayal by someone you trusted, or you're concerned about an elderly loved one's financial security. I hope sharing my journey has given you insight or courage. If it has, please consider subscribing to hear more stories of resilience and justice. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts or experiences. Your voice matters in this conversation. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing this story, sharing could help them recognize warning signs before it's too late. Thank you for listening to my family's difficult journey. Remember, it's never too late to rebuild, to find purpose in pain, and to create a new beginning after betrayal.